Hi, welcome to another episode of Hot Takes. Now, the SNP is wasting, I think, public taxpayers' money to fight women for Women Scotland, the pressure group, the activist group for Women Scotland. They say that men in prison is illegal because, the Supreme Court says that. No men in women's spaces. And yet the SNP are going to go to court. They're going to fight this. They're going to blow hundreds of thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money in order to allow biological men to be housed in female prisons. It's wrong. It's legally wrong. They can't win the case. Now, they say that they've taken legal advice. They're not publishing the legal advice. And I expect, okay, I will allow you not to publish the legal advice before the case because it may weaken your case. That's a right I'll allow. But they're saying that they're not going to publish the legal advice even after the case, which can only mean one thing. The legal advice is you can't win, which makes you wonder why they're going to fight this. Now, if the legal advice is that you cannot win, and they've still gone ahead to spend taxpayers' money, should they be personally liable? I think they should. But the ministers themselves are being taken to court. Remember this, it's this way round. It's not the SNP taking For Women Scotland to court. It's the SNP defending themselves against For Women Scotland. It is the ministers that are being prosecuted and sued because they're refusing to implement the Supreme Court ruling. Now, what they could do is just say, okay, we give up, we'll move the men out of the prison, and that's an end of the matter. But for some reason, their politics, their dogma is that no, we must allow weird men to have access to vulnerable women, to be locked in cells with vulnerable women overnight. It's been delaying enforcing this ruling for months, claiming it needs clarification. It doesn't. It's been the law since 2010. And it's suffered a humiliating loss already after judges ruled against its attempts to legally redefine a woman to include men. That judge took a very short time to do it. Now, the Supreme Court has said that the word sex, women and man in the Equality Act refer specifically to biological sex at birth, meaning that the sex is your biological sex, not whatever you fancy it being today because of your mental proclivities. And also that it is not changed in law by receiving a gender recognition certificate. Jolly bloody good. However, the government has updated its guidance in schools and its own public buildings after For Women Scotland threatened them with court action on that one. But they're not. They're standing their ground on the prisons. And that's very weird, isn't it? And of course, it was, how can we say, it's really it was what really pushed over the edge Nicola Sturgeon. Her firm belief that men can put on a dress and become women. But it's clearly not the case. You can't win this one. Now, hospitals also have to abide by this, and they can't put men into hospitals, into wards that are designated as female wards. But they still do. And in fact, there's even been cases where a rape has occurred in a ward. When the police turned up, the police were told, no, it couldn't possibly have done. They're an all-women ward, even though one of those women was a man. Therefore, the NHS is covering up rape. There we go. But the prisons is a sticking issue. There's at least 2 men held in a female estate, but we suspect more. But the SNP refused to give the numbers. But a Casey who's representing the SNP ministers concerned told a judge at the Court of Session in Edinburgh on last Wednesday that self-ID policies in jail will remain a live issue in this case until there is a resolution. This is basically saying ministers want to keep men in female prisons rather than putting men where they need to be, in the male estate. The upshot, of course, is that the men who pretend to be women in the male estate will get a lot more sex than they were bargaining for, won't they? But Jerry Monaghan, the KC, he confirmed that schools' guidance had been withdrawn. In other words, schools have to abide by it, but that they're not backing down on prisons. Why? What's the difference? Why? Why do they think that women in prison want to spend the night locked in a cell with a man? It's just weird. They say they want this case to be a judicial review. Well, it will be a judicial review of the ministers because it's the ministers being sued. And of course, it will be the ministers responsible. If they're found guilty, if they lose the case, it's a lot of money. And you have to ask, why is the Scottish government using taxpayers' money to defend when they know they can't win? It's going to be weird. That said, they haven't paid their previous legal bills yet. This was on the previous thing over women's rights as well, trans rights as they call them. They just can't. They just can't win. They keep losing, and then they won't pay the bill. One of the problems they've got now, of course, is that this bad credit in the legal profession has meant that fewer and fewer cases, fewer and fewer legal people are willing to defend the government, the Scottish government. So I don't suppose it will last much longer. Isla Bryson will have to go into a man's prison. He's one of those in a female prison, isn't he? Well, initially, he's in a man's prison now, but he was initially in the female prison. But there's a big tall one, I can't think of his name. But there's others. But, you can't put men in women's spaces. The law is clear. And yet still they're fighting it. They're weird, aren't they? They're weird. Let me know what you think. Thanks a lot. Bye.